Hi, my name is Kathy Alvarez, and in this presentation, we're going to be talking about domestic violence for healthcare professionals. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been working with victims since 2008 within local organizations here in town, such as Single Moms, Creative for Change, Twin City Mission, Domestic Violence Services, Restorative Justice Ministries, which holds classes for prison inmates. I've also worked in the high schools, A&M Consolidated, Bryan High, Rudder High School. So very passionate about working with victims. I also have a master's degree in victim services management. So I'll be pulling from examples that I've seen over the years as we go through this presentation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the definition. This is out of the Texas Family Code. So the definition for domestic or family violence is an act by a member of the family or household against another member of the family or household intended to result in physical harm, bodily injury, assault, or sexual assault. It also includes a threat that reasonably places that person in fear of imminent physical harm, bodily injury, assault, or sexual assault. This does not include self-defense. Unfortunately, I did work with a victim one time who was being strangled and picked up a coffee mug and tried to attack her boyfriend. Unfortunately, he ended up with a gash on his forehead, and when the police arrived, she was taken to jail and she ended up serving 9 months for that. Just to break down the definition a little further, family includes individuals who are related by consanguinity or blood, individuals who are former spouses of each other, individuals who have a child together regardless of whether or not they were married. It also includes foster child and foster parent. Household means a unit composed of persons living together in the same dwelling without regard to whether or not they're related to each other. So this really has to do with things like roommate violence or being attacked by, a relative, a distant relative that lives in your home. However, for the purpose of our presentation, we're going to focus on intimate partner violence or male-female, husband-wife, boyfriend-girlfriend. And then lastly, member of a household includes a person who previously lived there. So the reason why these definitions are so important is because sometimes you may be working with a victim, with a patient who's a victim or a potential victim, and they may not realize that they qualify for domestic or family violence services. They may make comments such as, well, we're already broken up, we're already divorced, or he doesn't live here anymore. Even if that person is attacked, they could be charged with family violence or domestic violence. So it's really important just to understand the definition and those components. So let's talk about some characteristics of abusers. Abusers come from all walks of life, every socioeconomic, ethnic, religious, employment, age background. Working here in the Brazos Valley, I've seen victims whose spouses, boyfriends were, a lawyer in downtown Bryan or professor at Texas A&M University. So they truly come from all walks of life. Some people tend to think that domestic violence tends to occur only in lower socioeconomic level neighborhoods, and that's incorrect. People who are in the lower socioeconomic level neighborhoods tend to be on someone's radar. So, for example, CPS, Child Protective Services, maybe Adult Protective Services, or they might just be on police radar. If you are middle or upper class, you're less likely to seek out those services. You can probably afford a counselor, marriage counselor, so you're on no one's radar. Abusers tend to be very manipulative. They will turn a situation around to make it appear as if it's the victim's fault. They tend to take no responsibility for their action. It's always someone else's fault, or there was a reason for the attack. For example, I was drunk, I was high, I would never do that unless I had a clear head, or, I just did that because I was angry. The abusive partner tends to be very possessive of the wife, girlfriend, and the children as well. Children tend to talk, so when they're out at mom's house, grandma's house, aunt's house, they tend to spill the beans as far as what's going on in the household. Abusive partners tend to have no respect for their partner. So they may ask for input, they may ask for their opinion, but they don't take them seriously, which can lead to distorted thinking. So abusive partners tend to see themselves very large in the world, whereas their wife and child may be much smaller. So this can lead to a sense of entitlement. So abusive partners will tend to think that, I know what's best, your family's no good for you, you don't need to hang out with them. Jealous, a huge characteristic here with abusive partners, not just jealous of other men, but jealous of anyone that will take time away from him. For example, the victim is typically not allowed to have a women's group or close group of friends that she can go out with. And lastly, control. Control is probably one of the biggest characteristics here of abusive partners. Not only are they trying to control the actions, but also the mindset of the victims. So some myths that you may have heard of over time. He's abusive because he's stressed. We all experience stress in every way, shape, and form. However, females don't typically go home and target their stress to one individual. His last girlfriend cheated on him. So you guys may have heard this story, right? She cheated on him several times. He's so untrusting, and that's why he is the way he is. Chances are you're only hearing one side of the story. He was abused as a child. There is a lot of abuse in the childhood of abusive partners. However, being abused as a child does not automatically mean that you will grow up to become abusive. He doesn't feel good about himself. Went too far. He doesn't feel good about himself. And this is something that I've heard victims say over time is he has low self-esteem. If I could just get him to open up. Really, that's not an issue for a lot of these abusive partners. Many times they're employed, they have jobs for years, they play roles in the community. So when people hear about the abuse in the home, they typically say things like, I had no idea, that guy, he's such a great father. So he knows how to communicate. He's just choosing when to communicate, when to withhold information. He just gets out of control. So he gets angry, he storms through the house, he's knocking things over, breaking things, kicking the dog. And so this is a pretty common story that victims will tell. Lundy Bancroft has been working with abusive partners for about 25 to 30 years. He wrote a book called Why Does He Do That? And in the book, he details the story of these men that just get out of control. So what he's done is, he will talk to the victim and ask, what did he destroy that was his? And most of the time, the victims will state that it's usually their property. He's not going into the garage and throwing the power tools out into the lawn. He's targeting her property. He's depressed or he has a mental health disorder. I think studies have shown now that men are less likely to receive any kind of services for mental health versus women. However, even in cases of femicide, there still aren't a high number of men diagnosed with depression or with, bipolar or even schizophrenia. A lot of women tend to think that their boyfriends or husbands are bipolar because, they'll be great at church, but once they get home, he becomes a completely different person. And that's not bipolar mood disorder or bipolar. He loves her so much it drives him crazy. So you may have heard this story before where she's moving on, she's, moved out and, starting her own life, and he just keeps coming around, stalking, calling her. He may even employ his family members to call her and say things like, he's so miserable without you, you've really got to give him a call, give him another chance. He says he can't live without you. He tells other people, if I can't have her, no one can, which can, a lot of times lead to femicide or murder-suicide, which we will talk about later. This is the cycle of violence. This phrase was coined by the psychologist Lenore Walker back in the 1970s. She was investigating cases of domestic violence. She was documenting stories, listening to women and their stories of domestic violence in the home. And so what she recognized is that a lot of these women fell into a pattern. So early on, we have this honeymoon stage where everything seems to be going well in the relationship, but unfortunately, over time, a tension building stage will appear. And so during the tension building stage, you have things like money, work, school, kids, learning, growing, just kind of the pains of a relationship. In a normal, healthy relationship, the couple can resolve any of their disputes, they can communicate, they can compromise in a healthy way and get back into that honeymoon stage. Essentially, they can problem solve. In a violence or abusive relationship, you have what's called a violence or abusive stage. And in this situation, you maybe the victim will come forward and make a complaint to the abusive partner, such as, "You really humiliated me the other night. I really want to talk about this. That behavior is not acceptable." And he may say something like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So in that scenario, you have something like emotional abuse. In the violent or abusive stage, it may start off as emotional and can lead to something physical, and of course just ends up worse over time. In the violence abusive stage, he may lash out and physically harm her. For example, he may attack her physically, which may result in a black eye, bloody nose, and she's having to have her lip stitched, and maybe she has a broken rib. So she's sitting in the hospital, and he returns with flowers and chocolates and candy and promises and jewelry. "I'm so sorry. This is never going to happen again. You know how much I love you. I'd never hurt you." And so, of course, she takes him back. So they're back in their honeymoon stage until the tension stage arises again, and then they just kind of lead into the cycle. And unfortunately, over time, the violent episode, as you can see here, the violent episode tends to get worse over time, whereas that honeymoon stage tends to go away. So what you're eventually left with is a relationship that just involves tension and violence. And it's not daily. It's not like the victim is being abused every single day. But, in a 4-year relationship, if there's 2 or 3 physical incidents, all of those 6 to 8 months in between, she is constantly walking on eggshells. She is saying the right things, doing the right things, talking to the right people, not talking to the wrong people. She's trying to control the situation the best that she can. The Power and Control Wheel was created by the Texas Council on Family Violence, and this is just other ways that the abusive partner will manipulate and control their victim. So, for example, isolation. That can be physically moving the victim from one location to another. It could be taking away her support system, so taking away her car, keeping her from her family and friends. If she feels alone, she's less likely to leave. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. Minimizing the abuse of saying things like, "I didn't hurt you that bad," "You're overreacting," or "I don't know what you're talking about, that never happened." Blaming the victim for the abuse. "Well, if you wouldn't have been doing this, or that, I wouldn't have done that." Using children. So if the children are going back and forth, for example, from one home to another, they may ask the children to pass along messages such as, "Tell mommy you want me to come home and you want us to be a family again." Unfortunately, the child doesn't understand what's going on or why they are apart. All they understand is that dad wants to come home and mom is the one who's not letting him. Economic abuse. So that could be things like taking her paycheck, giving her an allowance, a ridiculous allowance that she's not able to keep. For example, "Here's $100. This is your grocery money for the month for a family of 5. So when she can't do that, when she can't stretch that out, she has to come back to him and say, "I need more money." And his response will be something like, "Where's the money I gave you? I've got to take care of everything around here. If I didn't do everything, you would let everything, go to waste." Male privilege, saying things like, "I'm man of the castle," or "I'm the head of the household. Women are supposed to be submissive. It's in the Bible." That one gets kind of exploited pretty often, especially in religious homes. Coercion and threats, so coercing her, threatening her in any way, shape, or form, threatening to file false CPS reports, threatening to call immigration services, withholding her documents if she's trying to get like a visa, for example, threatening to hurt her, the children, her family. Intimidation could be things like standing over her, looking down at her, brandishing a weapon, property damage such as destroying any of her property, computer, laptop, jewelry, smashing things. And then lastly, emotional abuse. With physical assault, sexual assaults, there may be some type of physical evidence available. However, with emotional abuse, it's a lot harder to identify what exactly is going on. So this is things like putting her down, humiliating her, making her feel bad about herself, making her feel guilty for wanting to leave or for wanting to improve the relationship. Mind games, playing mind games. So things like, If she's 5 minutes late, he will question what happened. I was so worried, and she says, "Oh no, I'm fine. I'm doing just fine." However, the next time she's 5 to 10 minutes late, he may say something like, "Where were you? It only takes you 5 minutes to get home. Last time you were late, but you still got there on time." So then she's trying to justify why she's 5 to 10 minutes late. She may make comments such as, I don't know. There was traffic and I got off of work late. I lost time. I was talking to Susie down at the office. You can check my phone. You can check my email. There's nothing going on. So what he wants is he wants her to constantly be paying attention to his need. So let's talk about some factors that may contribute to violence. When we talk about things like culture, maybe the first thing that comes to mind are things like Middle Eastern cultures. However, even in our own culture, spousal abuse was outlawed about 100 years ago. However, it really wasn't enforced until about the 1970s and 80s. So that was just 40 years ago. Media, the way women are objectified in the media. We have, artists like Eminem, who wins Grammys for awards, yet he wrote a song about chopping up his wife in front of his child. Learned behavior. We do know that children learn from watching their parents, and so unless there's intervention, young men may grow up to think that this is the proper way to treat women. Drugs and alcohol. Anytime someone's under the influence, they may do things they wouldn't normally do. But also the money factor. A lot of times couples will fight over wanting to spend money on drugs and alcohol versus having to pay bills. So if you haven't guessed by now, our victim probably has low self-esteem, or if she didn't at the time of the relationship, start of the relationship, she probably does now. So some characteristics of our victims. She may be experiencing low self-esteem. She may be experiencing guilt, especially if he's saying things like, "Why are you trying to take my kids away from me?" She may be experiencing stress, post-traumatic stress disorder. She might be depressed, having suicidal thoughts. She may feel like a failure, but she does feel hopeful for change, especially when he's coming around and apologizing. She begins to remember who she fell in love with. He is, after all, the father of her children, and so she does want to keep the family together. She may have a sense of unhealthy boundaries or may take on more than she actually can. High tolerance for abuse, so she may have seen this growing up as a child, or she may have had several relationships like this. Parenting is not a priority. It's not that these victims are bad parents, it's that they are in survival mode. So they're not focused on, projects due at the end of the semester for their children. They're focused on, what am I going to do if I have to leave in the middle of the night? So why does she stay? I think the real question is, why doesn't he leave her alone? However, the last 30 to 40 years, we've been researching why does she stay. So the reason she stays, you probably guessed a few of these, but she stays for the children. She's worried that the children, should be in a home with their father versus a single mother. She may be economically dependent, so she doesn't have a job that pays enough to pick up and leave and start all over. She might be afraid of him. He might be, he's probably made threats in the past. They love each other. It's not about love, it's about the control. There could be mental or physical disabilities. One of them may be a caregiver, and so they feel very reluctant to leave, not knowing what's going to happen to the other person. There's also an investment in the relationship. If the couple has been together for 15 to 20 years, that's really hard to walk away from. The victim is worried that she may be homeless, so she may have to stay at a shelter or stay with family members, which isn't the ideal situation. She's worried she might have to tell family. Family will sometimes be very helpful and supportive and reach out to the victim and offer her support, and they're usually ready to help out as far as, we'll get you a ticket home, we'll help you with the kids, help you find an apartment, help you get on your feet. However, when a time comes to go, she doesn't. Maybe she goes back to the abusive partner after he's apologized and he's made us promises that he's going to go to church and stop drinking and take anger management classes, so she stays. And so the family is very upset with that decision, so they will tend to say things like, well, she's going to stay with him, I don't want to have anything to do with her, which becomes very hard for the victim because she tends to not have anyone whenever she really needs them. Religious beliefs, a lot of times victims will, I've heard over the years that God hates divorce. And so a lot of times they are reluctant to get divorced or separated, so they stay in the relationship. A lot of times they will reach out to their pastor or their preacher seeking advice for the abuse in the home. And they're told things like, you've got to have more faith. You've got to go home and pray about it. And so essentially the message to the victim is that it's their fault. They haven't prayed hard enough. They don't have enough faith. The shelters may be full, so she may not have anywhere to go. She may not speak English. She may not be from this country. If he's well known in the area, she may be worried that no one will believe her story. He doesn't abuse the kids, at least not yet. The police will blame her. She will blame herself. He will threaten to take the kids away. Unfortunately, that does happen at times. As you can imagine, they're standing in court and he says, "Judge, I have a home. I have a family that's very supportive. I've been at my job for 15 years and my boss is here. My coworkers are here. They'll tell you I'm a great guy." She, however, she's been bouncing around, from the shelter to her mom's house to her sister's house. She's unstable. She's on antidepressants. And so she will tell the judge, he beat the crap out of me and he kicked me and, he's abusive. And the judge will ask for her protective order. He will ask for her police reports. And unfortunately, a lot of times they won't be there. He will threaten suicide and he will threaten homicide. And leaving can be fatal. Women are 70 times more likely to be killed in the 2 weeks after leaving than any other time during the relationship. The abuser is losing control of the wife, of the girlfriend, of the children. He's going to start having to answer questions about, what happened to Joan? Where is she? Emotions are running pretty high in these type of situations. Typically across the United States, in law enforcement, 2 officers are sent to control this type of situation. So 2 officers typically are sent to the call, maybe 6'2", 200 pounds, 2 guns, 2 tasers, 2 batons, 2 sets of handcuffs, 2 pepper sprays. But we're talking about one victim who's 5'4", 120 pounds, and people wonder why she can't simply walk out the door. That is a very high stressful type situation. And so if you can imagine, it takes 2 officers every time, every call, just to go and find out what's happening. So it's very difficult for one victim to simply walk out the door. This is a photo from a murder-suicide back in 2011. There was a man who dressed up as Santa Claus, showed up at his estranged wife's house, shot and killed himself, their 19-year-old daughter, his estranged wife, his estranged wife's sister. I believe he also killed their son, his wife's sister's husband, and their daughter. So 7 total. So this is some data that I've pulled from the Texas Council on Family Violence. Every year they document how many women were killed in the state of Texas. You can see there over on the left, you've got from 2013 up to 2017. So the numbers that you see in red are the number of women killed in Texas alone for those years. So 2013 up to 17, so the last 5 years. The women that were killed were women between the ages of 20 to 39 made up half of the victims. The youngest victim was 14 years old, with the oldest victim being 84 years old. The relationship status, at the very bottom of the screen, you can see that 65 were the wife, 9 were the ex-wife, 41 were the girlfriend, 18 were the ex-girlfriend, with 3 being other. You can see down at the bottom, casual dating partners and stalking cases with no consent to relationship. So as you can see in most of these cases, you had a wife, girlfriend, ex-wife, ex-girlfriend. And unfortunately, 70% of the perpetrators killed their partners in the home. And we're talking about females as the primary victim. It does go the other way. There are male victims. There are female abusive partners. However, the dynamic is very different. When we're talking about a female abusing a male, the terror of living, the terror that they experience isn't the same as a female receiving the abuse from their male partner. So for the for the rest of the presentation, out of convenience, I'll continue saying male as the abusive partner. Just the means of death. Again, this is information from the Texas Council on Family Violence. 65% were killed by firearm. And then you can see the remaining means of death there on the slide. So for healthcare professionals, which that brings us to our role with potential victims who may be our patients. Patients come to us, they have a relationship with us, they trust us, they know that we'll keep their information confidential. It could be treatment and care. It could be they're here for a cold, they're here for diabetes, so we're doing some education with them. So we see patients for a number of reasons. One thing that I want you to consider is a short-term versus a long-term patient. We may see a new patient once for a cold, they may never come back. We may also see a long-term patient. So for example, we may have a patient who's diabetic who's coming in every 3 months. If you think something is going on, it's always best to take the opportunity to help someone and let them know that we are here to help them. So for example, if you suspect something might be going on and you think, oh, I'll ask her at the next appointment, just be mindful that there may not be a next appointment. Also, staff and coworkers, 74% of employed battered women were harassed by their partner while they were at work. One thing that's really frightening is that domestic violence is no longer in the home. We're seeing a lot of these perpetrators out in the community at salons, and they go to the mall, they go to the place of work, and they, kill, unfortunately, more than just their partner. When it comes to interviewing the patient, ask yourself, does the injury match the story? They may not want to tell you the entire story in one sitting, so be patient. The story may come in pieces. They may have to build some rapport with you first, but don't be afraid to ask the awkward questions. They may resist cooperation. He may be sitting in the lobby waiting for her to return, so just be mindful of that. They may also be experiencing PTSD, but be detailed and follow up. Some barriers to asking for help. Like I said, he might be in the lobby. He may have been her ride there. She may be afraid of CPS reporting. She may be afraid of our legal system. There could be a language barrier. She may not be from our country or speak our language. She may not be ready to leave or understand what options are available. We've already talked about how dangerous it is for a victim to leave, so the last thing we would want to do is tell the victim, you should leave tonight. She has to have a plan. She has to be ready. Some tips for working with potential victims. Try not to react physically or verbally. If they tell you something that's pretty shocking, your facial expression could say a lot. So if a victim discloses abuse and you, what? Really? They may think that you don't believe them. But follow policy and procedure, explain mandatory reporting if that's needed, and provide options. So some of the local domestic violence services that might be available, Phoebe's Home in the Brazos Valley, Safe House in Huntsville, and the Montgomery County Women's Center over in Conroe. So these are just some famous cases in the media involving domestic violence. O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown. There were a number of domestic violence calls and reports. He was acquitted for her murder. It could have very well been a domestic violence case. However, the police work was so terrible that, like I said, he was acquitted. So there's real no way of knowing if he was truly responsible for that. This couple here in the middle, Scott and Lacey Peterson, you may be familiar with that case. She had gone missing. She was 8 months pregnant. Her body washed up on shore a few months later. He was found guilty of the murder of his wife Lacey and their unborn child, Connor. What's bizarre about his case is that he had a whole other life. He had a girlfriend and was making plans with her. So just to show the manipulation involved. Down here in the corner, we have Emma Roberts. She punched her boyfriend, broke his nose, was arrested for domestic violence. Then they got engaged, and then they broke up. I'm not sure of their status now, but that just goes to show that cycle of together, off again, on again. Ray Rice here in the middle, NFL champ 2012 and educated role model for young men. And there was a video that surfaced of him punching his girlfriend in an elevator. He, of course, is no longer playing in the NFL. He's lost his deal with Nike, and so his girlfriend, at the time his wife now, blames the media for his loss in his career. Down here in the bottom right corner, we have Phil Hartman and his wife. She had a drug problem, and he was threatening to leave her if she didn't stay clean. She shot and killed him in his sleep, and then a few hours later shot and killed herself. And then lastly, we have Susan and Josh Powell. This is not a celebrity couple, but it is a famous couple in domestic violence. So I'll try to play a link here for you. We'll see if we can get it to pull up.
Sad story out of Washington State. Josh Powell, who lost custody of his two boys after being suspected of killing his missing wife Susan back in 2009, killed himself and the children Sunday by setting the house on fire with a gas explosion. ABC's Neil Karlinski is in Graham, Washington with the latest. Good morning, Neil.
George, good morning. There are two overwhelming emotions out here this morning. Deep sadness and also anger. Anger that these two little boys couldn't somehow be protected from their father, a man that so many people feared was a killer. The fire and apparent explosion was so powerful it shook neighbors' homes and sent bits of insulation from the house raining down on the neighborhood.
All of a sudden, the house shook, and I ran outside, and you can see this black smoke.
Minutes earlier, just before 12:30 Sunday afternoon, 7-year-old Charles and 5-year-old Braden Powell had been escorted into the home by a caseworker for a court-ordered visitation with their father, Josh Powell. Police say Powell forced the caseworker out, locked the doors. She saw flames and called 911, just as a series of blasts tore the house apart. Across town, Josh Powell's attorney says he received an email from Josh stamped 1205. It was 3 words: "I'm sorry. Goodbye."
This wasn't tragic. This was deeply wrong. This was evil. You do not kill little kids.
Police found 3 bodies in the center of the rubble, 2 children and an adult. They say there was no doubt that Josh Powell wanted to end his life and take his little boys with him, and say an accelerant was used to make the house burn quickly.
He grabbed the kids, locked her out of the house, and immediately the house went up in flames.
There he is. There he is. You see him?
Sources tell ABC News Powell's mood had changed drastically in recent days. He was more calm than usual, but also seemed excited about the future. He was last seen in public at this custody hearing on Wednesday, during which a judge ordered him to undergo a psychological examination and lie detector test while the kids remained with his missing wife's parents.
We're happy to have him with us. We want the best of the kids.
The decision was a blow to Powell, who recently lost custody of the 2 boys and remained the only person of interest in the disappearance of his wife Susan. Josh told police that he last saw his wife around midnight in December of 2009, before taking his 2 sons on a late-night camping trip in the Utah desert.
You know, I got out to a pretty late start.
This morning, the Cox family, which first lost a daughter, is now dealing with the almost unbearable deaths of their grandsons.
The Cox family's released a statement saying that they are devastated, that they always feared Josh Powell might harm the children. And there's also this bit of intrigue from their attorney, who says that the 2 little boys recently had started to speak about the night their mother vanished, saying they recalled going out camping late at night with their dad and their mother riding in the car's trunk. So unbelievably sad out here.
This concludes our presentation on domestic violence overview. Give me a call, email if you have any questions. I'm always available to help.